She thought she knew these mountains better than anyone, until the night she found a black panther frozen solid on her porch, a dying cub tucked beneath its body. Saving them was the easy part. What happened days later, no one on earth would ever believe. The night the mountain went silent, Lena thought the world had finally decided to stop breathing. No wind scraped the pines, no creek whispered under the ice, no distant owl marked the hours. Just a hard, ringing quiet pressing against the wooden walls of her cabin, the kind of silence that meant something was coming and there was nowhere left to hide. She sat by the fire with her mug of bitter spruce tea cooling in her hands, watching the flames chew slowly through the last of the dry logs. Snow hammered the windows in furious waves, trying to erase the cabin from the map of the world. Lena had known storms like this her whole life, but tonight there was something else riding inside the wind, something that crawled along the back of her neck and refused to leave. Out beyond the tree line, in that white, churning chaos, a shape moved against the storm. The mother panther was losing the fight. Her black coat, usually a perfect shadow, was buried under sheets of clinging ice. Every step felt like dragging chains. The cold had slid into her bones, into the tiny hearts pressed against her ribs. Two cubs, one on each side, shivered weakly, their once playful paws now heavy and stiff. She could have turned back, could have crawled beneath a fallen spruce and let the snow bury them in a quiet, frozen grave. But mothers made of wild muscle and old instinct do not quit, not while anyone they love is still breathing. A flicker of amber light cut through the white. Smoke, dry wood, human, danger. The panther's lip curled at the scent, a lifetime of avoidance screaming at her to retreat. But the cub pressed against her chest gave a tiny, broken cry. She had no language for pleas, no words for help, but she understood the edge between life and death. She chose the unknown. The cabin rose from the snow like a stubborn rock. The porch was half buried. Icicles hung from the eaves like teeth. With the last of her strength, the mother panther climbed the steps, claws scraping the frozen boards. The cubs slid a little, paws scrambling. She sheltered them with her body and lifted one paw to the door. A creature like her could break bone and crush throats, yet the sound she made was nothing more than a faint, brittle scratch. A surrender, not a threat. Inside, Lena's eyes snapped open. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks again, one more creak in a house full of ghosts and memories. Then the sound came again, soft, deliberate, hesitant, not the slam of a blown branch or the scuttle of a rodent. Someone, or something, was asking. She set the mug down and reached for the hunting rifle leaning near the hearth. Habit had kept her alive long before common sense ever tried. She padded to the door in thick socks, heart thudding, breath turning to mist. When she cracked it open, the storm shoved a blast of needles into her face. For a heartbeat, she saw nothing but swirling white. Then the world rearranged itself around the shape on her porch. It looked like death carved out of night. A black panther collapsed against the threshold, sides heaving in shallow, ragged pulls. Her fur was whitened by ice, her whiskers stiff with frost, and tucked close against her, one under her chin and one sheltered along her belly, were two tiny, motionless forms. For a long moment, Lena and the panther just looked at each other. Amber eyes met hazel ones, and everything Lena had been taught about predators screamed in her veins. Back away, close the door, live to see morning. But there was no challenge in that gaze, no thin line of territorial rage, only something Lena recognized from a place far older than fear. A question, a plea. Please. Lena had seen that look once before, in a hospital corridor years ago, when machines had screamed and a hand had slipped out of hers despite everything she'd done. She had promised herself that night she would never stand on the safe side of a door while something helpless died on the other. Her hand loosened on the rifle. She slid it behind the doorframe, out of sight, then opened the cabin wide. "All right," she whispered, voice barely louder than the storm. "Come on then. If you're going to kill me, at least you'll do it warm." The Panther watched her for another suspended heartbeat, then summoned strength from a place Lena couldn't understand. She heaved her body forward, claws scraping, dragging the cubs with her. One cub's head lolled unnaturally, and Lena's throat knotted. The big cat nudged them ahead with her nose, pushing them toward the orange glow of the hearth like a mother nudging children through a door in a burning house. Then she stumbled, legs folding, and crashed to the floor, her flank thudding against the worn rug. The door slammed shut behind them as the wind yanked it, but Lena barely noticed. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She dropped to her knees beside the cubs, hands already reaching, training she hadn't used in years flaring to life. Their fur was so cold it burned. "No, no, no," she muttered, scooping them up one by one. They weighed almost nothing, just skin, bone, and the barest echo of heat. She wrapped them in the spare wool blankets she kept by the fire for lonely nights and emergencies. This was both. She placed them as close to the flames as she dared, rubbing their sides, breathing warm air against their tiny muzzles. Behind her, a low rumble rolled through the cabin. Lena froze and slowly turned her head. The mother panther lay where she'd fallen, chest rising and falling in labored motions. Her lips were parted, teeth white and deadly, but the sound wasn't a growl of warning. It was something else. A warning to herself, maybe. A reminder that she was still capable of violence, and yet, for now, was choosing not to use it. "You touch them, I touch them," Lena said quietly, returning to the cubs. "That's the deal, yeah?" The panther's eyes tracked her every movement. When one of the cubs gave the faintest twitch, the great cat tried to lift her head and failed, a weak whine escaping her chest. Lena reached for the stack of towels, warmed her hands by the fire, and then, with slow, deliberate movements, she began to work the ice out of the mother's fur. The muscles beneath her fingers were corded steel, trembling from exhaustion. The panther flinched at first, but did not strike. Inch by inch, the ice cracked and fell away, dark fur emerging beneath like night returning after a long, cruel dawn. The hours that followed blurred together. Lena moved between panther and cubs, feeding the fire until the cabin's small room glowed with an almost unreal warmth. She warmed goat's milk on the stove and dripped it between the cubs' lips, praying their swallowing reflex hadn't frozen shut. The tiniest one finally coughed, then latched clumsily onto the bottle's rubber nipple. The sound of him drinking felt louder than the storm outside. The mother's eyes fluttered, then focused, and for the first time, a soft vibration rolled out of her throat, a purr so deep it seemed to resonate through the floorboards and into Lena's knees. "You hang on," Lena murmured, not sure which of them she was talking to. "You made it this far. Don't you dare quit now." By dawn, the storm had tired itself out. Snow lay in thick, smothering drifts against the cabin walls, but inside, the air was heavy with heat and the damp scent of thawing fur. The cubs were asleep in a tangled knot of blankets, bellies round with milk, ear tips twitching as if chasing something in dreams. The mother panther lay closer to the hearth now. At some point, Lena had dragged her inch by inch into the radius of warmth, and the big cat had been too weak or too trusting to protest. Lena's body ached in places she'd forgotten had muscles. She fell into the armchair near the door, rifle within reach but dusty and unused. The panther's gaze followed her, then softened. Without warning, the cat shifted, dragging herself across the rug until she lay between Lena and the door. It was the most dangerous position she could have chosen if she meant harm. Guard dogs lay between the threat and those they protect. Predators looking to dominate block the exit. This, the slow, deliberate way she placed herself with her back to the door, flank facing Lena, cubs in easy reach of both, felt like something else entirely. Trust, maybe, or something wilder that had no name in human languages. "You're insane," Lena whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "You know that? I must be insane too, because I'm letting this happen." The panther closed her eyes. The tension that had vibrated in the cabin since the first scratch on the door eased, just a fraction. Lena slept sitting up, hand wrapped around the rifle's stock, heart somewhere between dread and a fragile, stunned awe. She woke to a sound she hadn't heard in months. A soft, high-pitched chattering, like birds trying to talk. It took her a moment to realize it was the cubs. They were staggering around the hearth on wobbly legs, climbing over each other, batting at the dancing shadows on the wall. One of them tumbled nose first into Lena's boot and froze, tiny body trembling. Slowly, Lena extended her fingers, palm down. The cub sniffed, then headbutted her hand with all the dignity of a drunk bee. When she scratched gently behind its ear, it melted into the touch, a rumbling kitten purr vibrating through its chest. A deep sound answered from behind her. The mother panther had lifted her head fully now. Her gaze was clear, the lethargy replaced by an alert, evaluating presence. For a moment, Lena wondered if she'd overstepped, if this was the point where the truce snapped. Instead, the panther watched her cub lean into the human's touch, then gave a slow blink. It wasn't submission. It was permission. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm that Lena would later struggle to describe to anyone who hadn't lived through them. Morning broke in pale gray light filtering through frost-framed windows. Lena would stoke the fire, step out just long enough to gather more wood and check for tracks. Deer, hare, sometimes the heavy print of a distant elk. Then she'd return to the cabin, where a black shadow and two small bundles of chaos awaited her. The cubs discovered their legs, then their teeth. They chewed on everything: chair legs, Lena's bootlaces, each other's tails. Once, one of them latched onto the hem of her coat and refused to let go, dragging beside her like a stubborn living ornament as she crossed the room. The mother panther watched, sometimes intervening with a swift paw bop when play crossed into dangerous territory, more often just observing. She had stopped flinching when Lena moved near her. Once, as Lena passed the hearth, the big cat lifted her head and brushed her nose lightly against the woman's thigh. A contact so brief, Lena almost convinced herself she'd imagined it, until she saw the faint smear of melted frost on her pant leg. At night, after feeding the cubs and banking the fire, Lena would sit in her chair with an old journal open on her lap, not reading so much as hiding behind the habit. The panther would lie by the hearth, eyes half-lidded, the cubs a sleeping tangle pressed against her stomach. Sometimes, in the deepest hours when the wind howled and the world shrank to the circle of firelight, Lena would talk. Not to the animals. She didn't dare pretend they needed her words. but to the space between them, the space where trust had begun to grow. She spoke of the town below, of leaving the noise after the accident that had carved a piece out of her she hadn't known how to fill. She spoke of the child she'd tried and failed to save on a different frozen night years ago, when sirens had replaced the sound of the creek and fluorescent lights had mocked the gentle glow of a hearth. The panther didn't move. But sometimes, when Lena's voice cracked, the big cat's tail would twitch, or her ears would angle slightly toward the woman, as if catching every syllable. On the 7th day, Lena stepped outside to fetch water from the stream. The snow had stopped, leaving the world glazed and brittle under a thin winter sun. Her breath puffed white in the air as she stomped a trail through the drifts. Halfway to the creek, she stopped. Tracks crisscrossed the clearing: deer, rabbit, fox, and something else. Large circular prints with deep claws and a stride longer than any wolf's. They came from the tree line, skirted the cabin in a cautious arc, and then retreated into the forest again. Too large to belong to the mother panther. Too fresh to be old legend. Lena's stomach tightened. Something else had come in the night, smelled the warmth and life inside her cabin, and chosen, for now, to keep its distance. She followed the tracks to where the forest swallowed them, but the shadows between the pines felt thick and watchful. The hair on her arms rose even under the layers of wool. She turned back. Inside, the panther had risen to her feet for the first time since crossing the threshold. Her muscles rippled beneath her coat, still lean from the ordeal, but gathering strength. When Lena entered, the cat's nostrils flared, picking up whatever scent the woman carried with her. A low sound rumbled in her chest. Not fear, not exactly. Anger, maybe. Or warning. "You smelled it too?" Lena said quietly, closing the door with more force than necessary. "Something big." The cubs froze mid-wrestle, listening to their mother's tone. The panther padded to the window, placing one paw on the sill, gaze fixed on the tree line, as if expecting something to step out at any moment. That night, sleep refused to come. Every creak of settling wood, every sigh of wind against the roof, felt like footsteps. Lena kept the rifle across her knees, fingers resting lightly on the bolt. The panther lay not by the fire, but near the door again, body angled toward it, ears attuned to a frequency Lena couldn't hear. The cubs slept fitfully, waking to need their mother's side before collapsing again. Somewhere after midnight, a sound like a distant muffled roar drifted through the storm-carved valleys. It didn't belong to wind or avalanche or any creature Lena knew. It vibrated inside her ribcage rather than in her ears, an old sound that made the human part of her want to hide under the bed and the wilder part of her, an echo she'd never acknowledged, to stand and face it. The mother panther's head snapped up. Her eyes burned like twin embers in the low light. She released a single, soft chuff toward the cubs, who scrambled closer, tucking themselves almost beneath her. Then she looked at Lena, holding her gaze in a way that felt uncomfortably like another question. Not "help me" this time. Something heavier, something like, "Are you ready for what's coming?" Lena swallowed hard, fingers tightening on the rifle. "Whatever it is," she whispered, heart pounding. "You brought it here, didn't you?" The panther didn't answer, of course. But the silence that followed felt like agreement. And in that fragile, breathless pause before dawn, with the world beyond her walls holding its breath again, Lena understood one thing with awful clarity. Rescuing the panther and her cubs hadn't just changed the course of one stormy night. It had set something in motion in the mountains themselves, something that was now turning back toward her cabin with relentless, inevitable steps. The forest was silent again, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. Lena stood frozen, snow whispering around her ankles, staring at the 3 cubs huddled together where their mother had disappeared moments earlier. They weren't crying. They weren't panicking. They were waiting. For her. As if the invisible thread that tied them to their mother now wrapped itself around Lena. A strange ache bloomed in her chest. Fear, awe, responsibility. She crouched slowly, the cold biting through her knees. "All right," she whispered, voice trembling just enough to betray her. "Let's get you home." One cub stepped forward, pressing its tiny head against her boot. And just like that, Lena realized she no longer had a choice in the matter. She gathered them gently, tucking the shivering bodies inside her jacket one by one. Their warmth spread through her like a living fire. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt needed, truly needed. The hike back was brutal. Wind clawed at her face, snow thickened, and every few minutes one of the cubs shifted, making her tighten her arms to keep them safe. But she didn't complain, not once. Something primal pushed her forward, an instinct as old as the mountains themselves, protect what is vulnerable. By the time she reached the cabin, her limbs were numb, her breaths sharp. She kicked the door shut behind her, fell to her knees by the fireplace, and pulled the cubs from her jacket. They tumbled out like warm shadows, blinking at the sudden light. She wrapped them in blankets, heated milk on the stove, and fed them with a trembling gentleness she didn't know she possessed. As they drifted to sleep, one curled beside her thigh, another on her ankle, the last curled under her hand. Lena leaned back against the wall, exhausted and shaken. "Your mother will come back," she murmured, half believing it. "She has to." But hours passed, then a day, then 2. The mother never returned. By the 3rd morning, Lena knew something was wrong. Panthers were elusive, but not careless. A mother wouldn't abandon her cubs unless something had forced her hand, or her fate. Doubt gnawed at her. Should she search for the panther herself, or stay and guard the cubs who could barely walk without wobbling? She didn't have time to decide. Late that afternoon, as snow softened the world outside, a distant sound cut through the quiet. Heavy footsteps, snapping branches, and then a human voice cursing loudly. Lena's stomach dropped. Hunters. Not the kind from the old days who respected the land. These were opportunists who had been drifting through the region searching for trophies. She extinguished the lantern and shoved blankets over the cubs. Their tiny bodies trembled under her hands. "Quiet," she whispered. "Please, stay quiet." Shadows crossed the window. Then a fist slammed against the door. "We saw tracks," a voice growled. "You got something in there?" Lena didn't answer. Another voice chimed in, more vicious. "We know you took them. Open up before we take the door off its hinges." Her breath hitched. She wasn't armed. The nearest ranger station was nearly 30 miles away. She had 3 cubs who couldn't defend themselves, and outside stood men who would kill for their pelts. She stepped in front of the fireplace, fists clenched. If they broke in, she would fight. She didn't care how badly it ended. Better to go down protecting something innocent than survive doing nothing. The door shuddered under their blows, and then a roar split the night. Not human, not close, but close enough. The men froze. What the hell was that? Another roar, closer, louder, followed by the crunch of branches under something massive. "Let's go!" one of them shouted in panic. But it was too late. From the darkness, a shape lunged into the clearing, white snow exploding beneath enormous paws. The mother panther. Her black coat looked like moving storm clouds, and her eyes burned with wild gold. But Lena saw it immediately. She limped heavily. One leg dragged slightly behind her, a bullet wound. The hunters scrambled, firing blindly. Muzzle flashes burst like violent stars in the night. The panther dodged, snarling, each movement fueled by desperation and fury. She wasn't hunting, she was defending, protecting her young, the ones inside Lena's cabin. Lena didn't think. She grabbed the rifle above her fireplace. She barely used it, but she knew how. She swung open the window, steadied herself, and fired into the air. The crack echoed through the clearing like a warning from the mountain itself. The men stumbled back, cursing. "She's shooting at us." "You're damn right I am," Lena shouted, shoulders shaking. "Leave. Now." The next shot she took hit a tree inches above their heads. Meaningful. Fear beat greed. The men bolted into the woods, their retreat loud and sloppy. Silence settled again, but this time thick, heavy, waiting. The mother, Panther, turned toward Lena. Blood dripped from her shoulder, staining the snow. Her breaths came in ragged bursts. She stepped once, twice, and collapsed at the cabin door. Lena dropped the rifle and ran. The panther lifted her head weakly. Their eyes met, Lena's wide with fear, the panther's soft with something like trust. The same trust she'd shown the day Lena dug her from the snow, the same trust that had kept her alive. The cubs squealed from inside the cabin. The mother's ears twitched at the sound. She pushed herself up, trembling, failing, trying again, failing again. "Stop," Lena whispered, placing a hand on her side. The panther didn't resist. "You protected them. Let me protect you." Lena worked through the night, cleaning the wound, stitching it, warming the panther's body with blankets and the heat of the stove. It was madness, dangerous, reckless, but she didn't care. The animal had risked her life for Lena and the cubs. Human or not, that kind of loyalty deserved to be returned. By dawn, the panther slept, breathing shallow but steady, and the cubs slept against her flank, reunited. Lena sat beside them, exhaustion pulling her into sleep. She woke to the soft rasp of a tongue against her wrist. The mother panther was awake, watching her. The golden eyes that once held suspicion now held something far deeper. Gratitude. Slowly, cautiously, the panther pressed her forehead to Lena's knee. Lena's breath caught. A trembling hand rose, brushing gently across the animal's fur. The panther didn't move away, and for that moment, Lena felt the mountains breathe with her, felt a connection that went beyond species or fear or instinct, a connection forged in snow, danger, sacrifice, and something like love. Over the next days, the panther healed. Every morning the cubs played at Lena's feet. Every night the mother rested near her porch. Hunters vanished from the area, terrified of a ghost cat that walked silently through the trees. But eventually, inevitably, the time came. The panther stood tall again, strength returning to her limbs. She nuzzled each of her cubs, then turned to Lena. A long look passed between them, a final one. Lena swallowed. "Go," she whispered, voice cracking. "They're yours. They always were." The panther didn't roar, didn't growl. She stepped forward and touched her forehead gently, softly, to Lena's temple. A blessing, a goodbye, a promise. Then she vanished into the snow-dusted trees, her cubs bounding behind her. Lena watched until the last tail disappeared. The mountains were silent once more. But for the first time in her life, Lena didn't feel alone. The wild had chosen her, and she had chosen it back. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything.